So I'm currently in my cutting phase right now, one of many that I have gone through when it comes to bulking and cutting. And I thought to myself the other day, I've done this enough times now to know some of the mistakes when it comes to body recomposition. And through that experience, I've also learned what's most important in this process. So in today's video, I'm gonna go over 3 tips to maximizing your fat loss while retaining as much lean mass as possible that you undoubtedly worked so hard to build up during your bulk. Now, most likely none of these tips are revolutionary, but how you choose to prioritize them is important to maximizing the results of your body recomposition. So the most important thing is resistance training or maintaining the intensity in your training. I think it goes without saying that lifting weights builds muscle and strength. Obviously, you need to have that external stimulus to promote muscle growth through muscle protein synthesis. Basically, your muscles aren't going to grow without a good reason. And likewise, that same concept applies to when you're on a cut. You still need to provide that external stimulus to your body in order to maintain muscle. Now, you would think this is pretty intuitive, but I have seen so many people go on a cut, and the first thing they do is either decrease their intensity or just gut their program entirely. Essentially, they are getting rid of the one and only process that helped them build muscle in the first place. Now, while it's certainly easier to maintain muscle mass as opposed to building it, you still need to make resistance training the first priority to maintain muscle during a cut. Now, when you're on a cut, my advice for lifting weights is really not to change anything too much. Remember this, muscle is more metabolically active than fat, which means it takes more energy to sustain. If you are on a cut, well, that's obviously not optimal given, by nature you are now consuming less calories. So you need that external stimulus to convince your body that it needs to prioritize the biological mechanisms of sustaining muscle and instead use stored fat for its energy needs when possible. The second most important thing is the size of your deficit, or more accurately, the rate of your fat loss. Now, I know a lot of us are eager to cut down our body fat as soon as we can. Believe me, I can attest. And the way to do that is to be on a caloric deficit. But how drastic this deficit is will greatly impact your day-to-day performance. So if you're trying to cut your calories by too much, you'll find this affects your mood, your gym performance, and even psychology. Yes, you'll lose fat at a greater rate initially, but it probably won't be sustainable and you'll either eat back those calories, develop a bad relationship with food, and, you guessed it, lose more muscle mass than you'd like. Conversely, if you choose to cut your calories by a smaller margin, say 0.5 to 1% of your body weight per week, you'll find that fat loss, while slower, is much more manageable and also leads to more muscle retention. Now, from my experience, I used to always put myself on a very large deficit, probably about 1,000 calories, and it was awful. Now that I'm willing to put myself on a much smaller deficit, I feel like I'm almost on a bulk, except I'm actually able to still lose weight. And the only trade-off was just being more patient with my fat loss. So having more calories to work with when you're on a smaller deficit not only goes to sustaining your diet, but it also gives you more energy to work out, and it also gives you more macros to work with, which leads me to my last tip, optimizing your macros. So actually, I did a video last week on how to calculate your macros in a very simplified way when you're on a cut. And while I won't go into detail on that right now, you can definitely check it out here. Now, while this step is actually quite important to maximizing your fat loss and muscle retention, I see a lot of people put the most effort into this step while neglecting the other two. And honestly, I think that effort is a little bit misplaced. You see, your macros, while they are important, will not determine fat loss if you aren't in a deficit. And likewise, they won't determine muscle gain if you aren't first subjecting your body to an external stimulus. Optimizing your macros are great because you want to make sure you get enough protein to maintain muscle and also enough carbs for energy and then enough fats for hormonal regulations. But too often I see people meticulously focusing on their macros almost to the point where they're just basically worrying about it. And I don't think that type of effort is actually conducive to body recomposition, especially if it comes at the neglect of the other 2 points that I mentioned. Optimizing your macros is probably the least important of these 3 tips because once you figure out the best ranges for them, and it's not difficult to do that, all you have to do is just stick with them. All right, everyone, so those are my 3 tips when it comes to losing fat while retaining muscle. The most important thing you want to do is to prioritize resistance training, followed by creating a manageable caloric deficit, and then after you've done that, worry about your macros. If you were to reverse the priority of these tips, you'd probably find out sooner or later that it's just not optimal. Now, when I did my first bulking and cutting phase, I cut my calories by too much. I reduced my resistance training, and I focused so much on my macros that in order to hit my protein intake, I basically just drank protein shakes all day. And I can tell you right now, that cut did not go well. Anyway, I hope you found this video helpful. If you have any questions or comments, let me know down below. I'd love to start a dialogue with you all. But until then, I'll see you next time.